All right, I think we're live. Hello there, and welcome to the Deadly Analysis Podcast. In case you're new to this channel, this is our weekly show where we attempt, or I should say where I attempt, to open the program with a really bad pun about the film that we're about to talk about. However, week after week, these all end in failure, and so to do that for The Lobster would be very shellfish of me. So I don't think I'm going to do that this week. I don't even know why I'm attempting to crack jokes about this film, honestly, because this movie might be like the most depressing movie I've ever seen. The Lobster is essentially like what you'd have if Dolores Claiborne took 3 Xanax and started a dating website. That's The Lobster. Like, this was legitimately, to me, one of the hardest films I think to watch. When I meet Jonah in person, I think the only thing I'm not going to shake his hand. I'm not going to give him a hug. I think I'm just going to force him to dig his own grave right in front of me, like just as recompense for recommending this. Like, I want to watch him like they did in the movie, dig his own grave. So tonight's a little different. The Lobster, not really a horror film, at least traditionally, but certainly horrifying in many respects, I think. And that's traditionally what's enough for us to cover a film like this. I think this movie represents the degree of plasticity we have when we talk about scary movies. I mean, like, this is a very scary movie to Jonah. And in fact, it's not just Jonah. There's there's a couple giant Reddit threads dedicated to this film specifically being a kind of horror film. And Shayra's not with us tonight. Sounds like she died. Shayra is not here in the show with us tonight. She's digging her own grave. But her husband, Daniel, had the same sort of reaction when watching this film. He sort of treated it in the same way I think we would all treat kind of a traditional horror film. It really freaked him out. It really left a stone in his shoe. It really scared him, and it did the same thing for Jonah. So I want to put forth kind of a very open and very loose definition of horror, one that emphasizes eliciting some kind of fundamental fear that we have, regardless of like the Blockbuster video section that we grab it from, right? Or I guess in this case, it would be the Netflix section that it belongs to these days. Jonah made the comment, I didn't know this till today, that if you go to IMDb, this is technically classified as a comedy, which seems insane to me. Maybe it doesn't to you. It just does to me. By the way, you ever notice like how like Netflix sections are getting way more specific? I just noticed that. Like, I feel like this film, if you were to find it on Netflix, it's not on Netflix, I don't think, but if it was, it would be under like deadpan black comedy horror recommended because you watched Being John Malkovich and a documentary about like sea crustaceans. Like, this is one of those films that makes no sense. There's really no place you can categorize it or fit it into. Maybe drama, I don't know. But it's like, you know, we're sort of in a whole new world of categorization these days. So I don't feel like it's too far of a stretch to talk about The Lobster like it's a horror film. I mean, it's dystopian, it has violent deaths in it, and it attempts, I'm gonna be nice and say that it attempts to offer commentary on a particular fundamental issue that in and of itself can be psychologically terrifying to certain people. So The Lobster, what is The Lobster about? Long story short, it's about a man named David. Very, very powerful name, very standoutish name, David, who's recently become single within the context of a deeply dystopian society where single people are treated as second-class citizens and shuffled into a hotel to find a suitable partner. And so they have 45 days. David has 45 days to find a compatible partner, or he will be turned into an animal of his choosing, in which case he has selected to become a lobster. And as I'm talking, I'm realizing that I can't believe this is actually the premise of a film. I feel like the director, Yorgos Lanthimos, must have like eaten some really fucked up seafood on a really bad date and like hallucinated a good part of this film. So I'm here today with Ben, Antonio, or Antonio's not here. So it's Ben, Jonah, Jim, and Garrett, and myself. And I want to kind of start this show off in maybe a little different way compared to the others. And I want to begin by asking you all this easiest question in the world. Which animal would you choose if you were checked into this hotel and you had 45 days to find love? You have to answer right now, Jim. Jim has that look like he's thinking. You can't think. You just have to go with your gut. I'll start if it makes it. I'll start. I would be a great, and I thought about this. I would be a great horned owl. Okay, and there's a couple reasons for this. One, I would constantly have a look of judgment on my face, which I totally dig. Like, have you ever seen a great horned owl? They just look like they're judging you. I could fly, which in and of itself isn't super great, but that just means I could shit all over everybody. So I can judge them every time I look at them. I can shit all over them as I fly. It's just a great animal. So that's my animal. What animal would you guys choose if you were in this hotel? Let's start this off optimistically, because I feel like by the end of this session, this is going to be the most depressing fucking episode ever. So I'm trying to start off on a good foot here. So what animal would you guys choose?
Well, since you... Go ahead, Jonah. What was that?
Mayfly.
A mayfly. Why would you be a mayfly?
Because my only function is to breed and then I die. Life is difficult in it. It really sucks. Mayflies have like the shortest lifespan, or one of the shortest lifespans. It's a couple hours. So my second chance at life would be over as soon as possible.
Yeah, so they're like the gangster rappers of animals, like live fast and die young, right? A mayfly.
Yeah,
I like that. Got it.
Just done. Get it over with.
Yeah, fucking die. It's an amazing animal to be. What about you, Jim?
Well, since you said that I couldn't, as soon I was thinking about it, and then you said you're not allowed to think about it. So
yeah, you got to go with your gut. Go with your gut.
Like a horse was the first thing that came to my head.
Okay, don't go with your gut. You need to think about this more. Yeah, right. That's a bet. Yeah.
So I'll think about it more while Garrett and then
Jim would be glue in like 2 weeks. That's essentially what he's saying.
So what I'm going to have to go with is going to be a royal penguin, and specifically because there is a second chance, right? And the way to get that second chance at a human life is to fall in love apparently as an animal. And I believe, unless I'm completely off base, that they explain that in the movie. Okay, so the reason I'm going to pick the royal penguin is because this is one of the very few animals that mates for life. And, making a lot of assumptions about animal psychology here, behaviorally speaking, if you view that behavior, it's kind of the closest thing that I can think of to sort of like a visual and like representation of finding love as a non-human animal. So that's what I'm going to go with, the thing that optimizes my chance to get back into human shoes again.
Utility. You took that road.
Before Garrett goes, I just want to say that, we'll get into this, but I don't think that your interpretation was correct. I think once you're an animal, that's it. You die, and there is no third chance.
Ooh, would that change your mind? If that's true, would that change your mind?
No, I think Ben outsmarted the movie. So we got to give him props for outsmarting the question.
Yeah, no, I agree with Jonah. I don't think that they're saying if you find a partner as an animal, then you can come back again as a human. I think the idea is just that you can, because the powers that be in the society believe that being with someone is so important that they think the only thing that, when you're going to turn into an animal, people are thinking, oh no, if I'm an animal, I'm not going to have a partner. And they're like, oh no, don't worry. You can still have a partner. It just has to be of your own animal kind. I think that's what that little part of the monologue was supposed to be about. Could be wrong though. Ben's interpretation is an interesting one.
Well, fair enough. So let's assume that that's not the case. That would change my answer, and I would have to go for something like a bowhead whale that can live up to maybe like 200 years and just maximize my life that way. So yeah, second choice.
If I'm not mistaken, I think it's some kind of turtle, like great turtle that lives the longest. It lives like up to like 600 years or something like that. I
thought about that one. That was a tempting option. But I just can't get past the idea that I can fly and shit on people and judge them.
By the way, this idea of living for 200, 600 years or whatever goes into kind of corroborates with my second blog post about living forever for a really long time. Like, I don't know if you guys have read that yet other than Noah, but basically I write about how eternity is its own punishment. 600 years is pretty close to eternity in my book. So when you're single and lonely. Anyway.
All right. What would you choose, Garrett?
Yeah, I'm glad I get to go last because I kind of want to parlay it into a discussion. As far as outsmarting the movie is concerned, I think I actually outsmart the movie. I would choose human being because human beings are animals. And it never specifically says non-human animal in the film. It just says animal. So, okay, I'll take human being again. Thank you very much.
This is where they put your hand in the toaster for being a smartass.
Then I'll take whatever the next evolutionary step of human being is.
Yeah, the post-human.
Yeah, I'll be the post-human being, whatever that is. So now we both outsmart. All three of us, Ben, Garrett, and I, have.
Now, here's the thing that I wanted to parlay it with on that. Other than the title of the film, and admittedly a quirk of the film, it seems to me that aspect of it was completely irrelevant to the film. You could have almost this exact same movie without the turn you into an animal element. There's a version of that script where instead of turning you into an animal, they just execute you. And the film is basically the same. It lacks a little bit of quirkiness, which is an improvement, I suppose. But I really wanted them to do more with that premise. There was an interesting premise, and they just sort of let it fall flat. Like, case in point. The main character wants to become a lobster. He says his reasons why are because They're fertile for their whole life. They're blue-blooded, and they live in the water. But none of that comes up in the film. I mean, again, if he hadn't said any of those things, he has an opportunity to go swimming in the pool. He has an opportunity to go swimming in the ocean. He doesn't take it. If he didn't say that he liked the water, you would have no idea that he liked the water. It is completely unconnected. His choice of animal is completely unconnected to his character and to the rest of the film. And that was a serious disappointment for me.
You're correct. And I'm going to say but it's not going to retort it. You're correct, but I think, and this is something I wanted to bring up, the very opening of the movie, before anything happens, and this is the first time I saw it, a woman who I thought was the short-haired woman who kills. By the way, you guys got the fact that the dog was his brother, right? Okay, so the one who kills his brother, she goes and she shoots a mule. And when the short-haired woman is introduced later, I'm like, is that the woman from the beginning of the movie? And I had to go back later and watch it, and it wasn't, but it looked enough like her that I think it's her sister or maybe her mother. And so I think that that opening scene is sort of the end of the movie. That scene is that she's killing, because remember, he turns her into the worst animal, and I think it's a mule, and if I understand correctly, mules are infertile, so they can't reproduce. So she puts her out of her misery. So that scene is the end of the film. So I think that tie, I mean, again, yes, that scene could have been cut and it wouldn't have changed the story, but I think it just kind of puts a button on that universe that the movie takes place in. So I just,
I was just going to say, to piggyback off Garrett's point, like, the function of the animals seem to be somewhat superfluous. So like, maybe I'll ask Garrett's question this way to you specifically, Jonah, since this is the film you chose. If it wasn't that you turned into an animal and that you just were simply executed, would this movie have scared you more or less? By the way, that's my brother back there on the couch, in case you can't.
Yeah, right. Oh, I want to answer your question, because this definitely, for me, like, I'm not stupid enough to think that animals were once people.
No, but I'm saying, like, would it function in a way that would scare you more if it was just direct execution?
I don't think it would have changed my opinion, because I feel like the movie is direct execution anyway. I feel like it's just execution by proxy. So I wouldn't have changed it at all. I mean, it may have made the movie a little less interesting, but it wouldn't have scared me anymore, because it's kind of the same to me. I know it's not, I think semantically it's not the same, but it's thematically it is.
So isn't this, I mean, again, I think this is a pretty big problem for the film. I mean, again, you could have taken that premise and done something with it. You could have made it such that the choice of animals was really integral to the character or to the plot in some way, and they didn't. And that, to me, is a serious missed opportunity. It seems like they came up with this quirky idea and did nothing with it.
I agree. That's a complaint I've heard. Really, it's two movies combined into one. Once he enters the woods, it's like a different movie completely, and they never really visit the hotel. So it's kind of a movie that lacks direction. One of the things I was saying to Noah is that I never said this was a good movie or a great movie. I just said it was a scary movie. Every point you're making is valid, and it's kind of indefensible that the mistakes that it made, and the whole movie could have just been about turning into a lobster. But at the same time, I think that would have diminished the movie, because then it just becomes a cute, quirky movie. A lot of people think, oh, I can't say this. I was going to reference something else, but
so
I just think it would have diminished.
Let me ask you this.
All the way. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. What about this movie scared you specifically? Like, why is this? You said it's not you never said it's a good movie or a bad movie, but it was a scary movie. What was the thing about this that scared you the most?
All right. I can't get too deep into this, but I relate to it very personally because of my lack of relationships that I've had. I've said before, so I kind of have 4 bullet points here, and I'm going to try to not talk about myself while talking about myself. I'm 35, and because of the lack of relationships I've had well before this movie came out, I felt like I'm not a human, and like I don't belong in society, because society puts so much emphasis on the importance of relationships, and if you don't, and they're kind of to be made fun of, like, what's wrong with you? How can you not have had a relationship? So that movie hit that. And then I've also gone through, I grew up in an environment where I was physically punished for having physical contact. So the kind of idea of being punished. So now you have this dichotomy where you can't have it, and you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. No matter what happens, you're kind of going to be punished for it. And how do you reconcile those two? It's kind of like, I'll get back to that. And there's other themes, like wanting to break people up out of jealousy, like when he enters the boat to try to get them to break up. And this idea of, if I can't, there's kind of this idea of how come other people can have it if I can't. It's a very immature idea, but it's one of the phases that people go through. I'm kind of talking off the cuff, so I'm not being as coherent, but
basically, so those, Jonah, real quick. So those are the reasons you connect with the film, right? Yeah. Those are the reasons that you can connect to it, maybe relate to it. Does it scare you because it's a mirror of yourself? Like, why would that scare you? I mean, I can think of films, for example, that I have connections to, where a character gets beaten or something. I've gone into that in my It Follows podcast. You know, I went through physical abuse when I was growing up, but that doesn't, because I can relate to that, doesn't necessarily mean the film is super scary to me. So is it scary to you because you can relate in a way, you can relate to a film in which people like you are seen as second-class citizens? Is that kind of what you're saying? That it sort of contextualizes a lot of the stuff that's happened to you in life and puts it in a way in which you're perpetually penalized? You see a film where that perpetually penalizes you?
Well, basically, on one hand, it's a relief. It's like hearing a song that you just really identify with, and you're like, oh my God, somebody else feels the way I do. And it's like this huge weight taken off your shoulders. But the other thing is, I feel like this is the world we live in. And this is our reality, obviously taken to, a ridiculous, taken to absurdity. But I feel like this is the world, this is how people see me, and this is how I should feel about myself. And the movie doesn't encourage you to feel.
There's no redemption. There's no redemption from characters that have that sort of thing.
Everything's going to be okay. It means you deserve this punishment. And I feel like the movie, on one hand, is holding my hand, and on the other, it's cutting it off. So.
Yeah, that's a really good response, Jim. To also, I wish Shayra was here because she could go into this a little more. But her husband Daniel has severe social anxiety, and so this film scared him immensely. And he's married. He's married to Shayra, so it didn't scare him in the sense that it didn't scare him within the context of finding or not finding a partner, but more in the sense of like the awkwardness of human relations. And it just made him feel creeped out and eerie, I think. And you got to think about it this way. This film is definitely, I think this film can be seen as a scary movie for people who are seen as second-class citizens, either because of social faux pas, relational issues like Jonah is describing. If you're within a certain subcategory, this film is going to, it triggers the wrong word, but it's going to make you feel extremely uncomfortable. And uncomfortable in kind of the way we've defined fear is one of the ways to describe it, I think. It certainly seems uncomfortable to see those things come up. This film didn't scare me at all, right? So to juxtapose this, when we did my It Follows discussion, one of the scariest films I've ever seen, it like hit me in my core about contemplating death and stuff. And to Jonah, it was just like, what? This ain't scary. Like, this ain't scary. What's the matter with you? Like, it's like 9 out of 10 Noah, Ben 8 out of 10, Shayra 9 out of 10, Jonah 3 out of 10. You know what I mean? So I think this is one of the reasons I wanted to kind of do this podcast as kind of a project, is different people really get struck differently with things that scare them or make them think or turn inward on themselves and think about things about themselves. And I think this film is good at doing that to a very small subsection of people, not to diminish them, but a subgroup of folks.
So now, I gotta say, I'm somewhat puzzled, Jonah, based on what you said in the past, though. I mean, I understand everything you say about why you identify with the film, why you think it sort of hits good emotional notes, and why it's important. And then it sort of draws attention to, yes, the ways in which society does sort of treat adult single people like they're somehow lepers or something like that. And that all makes sense. But from what you said in the past is the only films that scare you are the films that you have some sort of purchase on your life in the sense of that might happen to me, or I can imagine that happening to me. And I'm pretty sure you're not imagining this happening to you. You know, no one's going to put you in a hotel and force you to act in this way. I mean, it seems like rather than being a scary movie, this should be a vindicating movie. This should be a big fuck you to society that treats people without partners in this way. That's not scary. I would think that would be liberating and vindicating.
Well, see, that's one of the things that the movie has so much, just extracts so many contradictory feelings for me, because partly it is vindicating, and it feels like that finally somebody understands what I'm saying, and the movie's on my side, and it's like her. I had to get it out of my system. That's the only reference I'll make. No, but it's at the same time, though, I don't actually believe that the things in this movie, I'll be put in a hotel and turned into an animal, but I feel that the movie's like a poem about how society views me, and how if I begin a relationship and I'm like, I've never had a relationship, I have to give this explanation, and I have to justify it, and I have to defend it, and people were put off by that. And like, then there's this, a while ago, I wrote this short story, sort of, and I talked about how it's like going through and trying to have relationships is like being in a room with like 100 stoves that are on, and you have to keep touching the red burner until you find the one that feels good. And by the time you do, you're not going to feel it anyway. You know what I mean? Like, you don't know that every red burner is going to burn you. I mean, how can you make that assumption? You just keep touching them until it feels good. So there's this idea with the short-haired woman that we're not supposed to feel anything. We're supposed to be completely numb and emotionless, and that's why, like, she is angry with him for crying when she kills the dog, and why she wants to have like sex without any emotion. I mean, she's completely just shut off. And it's like, that's the direction I have to be for it to happen. That's what society says. You have to not want it for it to happen. You have to, when you're not expecting it, that's when it's going to happen. So it's like, I have to keep until I'm completely numb. That's what I have to look forward to. I have to keep just popping holes in myself until I'm ready to be dead. And then it will happen. Then my reward will come. So a point I wrote down is that the movie, it's classified as a comedy on IMDb, but the music is whimsical and funny, which in itself is cruel. And it's like it's making fun of the victims. I see the face you're making. Hang on. It's like putting yakety sax in a scene in Saw, basically. What is that? What is that look?
That'd be badass. Sorry. Whoop.
What does that look, Garrett? Like,
you thought the music was whimsical? I mean, I fucking hated the music, start to finish. But not because it was whimsical. It sounded somewhat vaguely like, if any aspect of the film was a horror film, I think the music was a horror film. It sounded, kind of like Psycho to me, in some ways. But it did not seem to fit at all. I mean, it fit in the sense that it made you uncomfortable, and the film's obviously trying to make you uncomfortable, and so it succeeds on that level. I'll give it that. But I would completely go back and scrap that soundtrack because it's totally
what I think is that the movie, so a while ago, another short story I wrote is about what happens in the last hour of an old man's life. And the narrator, me, is making fun of this old guy as he's dying. And then he's like kind of breaking the fourth wall and turns to the reader and says, come on, let's encourage, like, laugh at him, point and laugh at him. And one of my best friend, he said, I hate it because it's so cruel. It's so mean. And I'm like, that's the point. It's supposed to be mean. It's supposed to be like, kick him while he's down. And so I feel like the movie is trying to do everything it can to be as mean and like when the cookie lady kills herself, it's like they're trying to inject levity into that, when like she's like, don't like he's trying to pretend not to care. And I mean, the movie is just, it's so mean. and it adds to that by the tone and the music and the narration, and it's kind of like a lumbering, almost, it's very discordant music, but it's like a lumbering, it's like fat person walking music.
So let me bring this back to kind of center this. So Garrett's question originally, and I feel like you actually answered it. Garrett's original question was, why would this scare you? It would seem to me to be that it would be vindicating for you. And your very long-winded answer sounds to me like this is actually the way the world is. That's why it scares you. Like that's what's scary, is that this is the way the world, that the keen insights that are they're not keen to me. The things that I think the film attempts to talk about in terms of societal perceptions of single people and of perpetually single people and of people not in relationships is horrifying, and it's true. It's actually a part of the world, and to a certain, like I said, to a certain subgroup of people, that's daunting. It's anxiety filling. It's depressing. It's seen as cruel. And I think the music, Garrett, I kind of agree with Jonah. I mean, the music to me was whimsical. It was very glorious and powerful in a context when it shouldn't be. And I think that it just serves to underscore the absolute cruelty present in the movie. And I think that's the point. It's ultimately what makes it so scary.
I don't know when to shut up because I'm a camera.
Well, let's throw this off real quick, Jonah. Let's throw this off real quick to Jim or to Ben and kind of get their thoughts. I hope that like Garrett, I feel like he answered your question. I hope that makes, like, that's what I got from that. I feel like the answer to that is, well, yeah, it vibes with me, but I don't want the world to be that way. Like that sucks. Yes, it's like I'm connecting to it, but I don't like the world that way.
All I was going to say when I did this was that I said that I feel like this is the world we live in, and I crossed that out because they finally said it. So basically, that was one of the first things I said. So, not obviously not literal. It's a poem. The movie's a poem.
No, that really is my brother. Oh, she's not back there anymore. Sorry.
Well, as the sort of other single person in the podcast today, I can agree with Jonah's point to the extent that, yeah, this is how this is a metaphor for how single people are treated in society, but I think that's a point that gets made in the first maybe 5 minutes of the film or 10 minutes of the film, and then the film goes on for another 2 hours after that. And that's where I ended up sort of bailing on the film. I'm like, I get your criticism. Awesome. What's next? And then we go to the forest, and then the forest just trades one form of fascism for another form of fascism. And I think that this film is more like, when I'm being generous to the movie, I take the criticism about how single people are treated, and yeah, that's cool. And then I also think about, if I'm being generous to the film, I'm thinking about how this is a portrayal of fascism, societal fascism, how social interactions can combine to work in the same way a totalitarian government would, right? So if a totalitarian government is setting up how the society wants it to, how it wants the society to behave, then this is kind of the way that this is a portrayal of that, perhaps. So for me, when we move to the forest, I'm expecting there to be a sense of freedom associated with the societal structure, and instead it's just another form of fascism. And that might be a kind of interesting interplay between another way to look at this film. Let's put it this way. That might be another way to look at this film beyond the sort of the surface idea of single versus coupled. I don't know if anybody wants to run with that to the end zone.
I think that it's just to show that it's impossible, that you can't win. It's not that it trades one form of fascism for another. It's just that there is no better alternative. What I wrote is that it's impossible. You're forced to be in a relationship. If you don't succeed, you lose your rights to be a human. If If you choose to be a loner, you'll be hunted and forced into a relationship, which again, if you fail, you're banished from society. You're not even allowed to have physical contact within that second society. But even as a loner, there's no physical contact allowed. And if you're lucky enough to have a relationship, the best you can do is be with someone who shares your maladies.
Right. The film's ideas of relationships are so fucking narrow, right? Like it's only people who are the same. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but for me, the idea of finding somebody who is exactly like me is fucking terrifying and stupid. I have me. Why would I need me in a skirt? Instead, I'd want somebody who challenges aspects of my personality and who's different from me in new and interesting and enlightening ways. And that's the one prospect that this film and the philosophy about relationships behind this film never considers. It never considers that the two people who are different can actually be synergistic.
Well,
right. No. Just to piggyback off that, and then I'll hand it over to you, Garrett. That to me was the biggest criticism of this whole movie, is what Jim said, is that, it took trivial traits. By the way, both my wife and I are nearsighted. Just going to throw that out there before I preface anything. But it took like really trivial traits and made them the centerpiece, right? So it wasn't like sharing religious values, or like you're both vegans, or like, no, it's your nosebleeds, and so does mine. It's short-sightedness, right? Why not impulsiveness, right? That's the other thing I hated about this movie, is that there were monotone, non-emotional characters. And any critique the film is going to make by trying to strip characters of those facets, because I get why I think that's in there. It's to sort of, I'm doing, I think, the film maybe too much of justice by trying to explain it this way, but I felt like the point to make with having these trivial traits and having everyone talk with no emotions was to strip away a lot of the stuff that gets in the way of looking at like the core aspect of what it means to be a man in a relationship with a woman, or a woman in a relationship with a man. But the problem is, you're not going to really get to anything deep or fundamental about the human condition if you remove things like erotic passion or impulsiveness or emotion, or like the values that you share, right? So on one hand, it purports to give us something like functionally important or socially important for us to talk about, but it strips like the very thing that makes that conversation broad and important. So in that sense, to me, it's just an insanely flawed film for doing that. So I just wanted to agree with Jim.
What about?
I'm going to agree with Jonah on this one. Oddly enough, I mean, my impression was that the reason why all the characters are flat is precisely because these are the social rejects. These are the awkward people in society. These are the people with social anxiety or autism spectrum disorder, something like that. That's precisely why they're there in the first place, is they can't really connect with other people and they have difficulty socializing. So that's why they were so messed up. Something interesting, which I didn't know until I checked the IMDb page, but David is the only named character, and everyone else is named based on their either their job or their disposition or their medical condition or whatever the case may be. And so, I mean, I think, again, it somewhat ties back to my earlier criticism about the characters not really being characters, not really having any sort of personalities. And that's, on the one hand, kind of a lame thing, but I think the point of the films are trying to show, again, an aspect of the human condition which is real, but it's something that most normal people, neurotypical people, don't really find part of their daily lives. The reason why they're pairing people up with people based on these maladies is because for these people, those are the only remarkable things about them. John C. Reilly's character, the guy with the lisp, there's nothing else about him at all that would remember him by or catch you by significance. That's not just a flaw in the film. That's sort of the point of presenting the characters in this way.
Okay, he can fight like a badass. I don't know.
I have 2 points I want to make to that. First is that idea of being, nearsightedness or with a limp is cute for the movie, but it's inherently political. What if they say my identifying characteristic is that I'm black? You know what I'm saying? It's how we judge people. It's very superficial. It's very dangerous line to walk. So by making it about something that is very superficial, it's I think it's how we judge people. For example, I have a disease called neurofibromatosis, and the back of my head is very malformed and lumpy, and I wear a hat and I wear hoods because I'm very self-conscious. And for me, I feel like that's my identifying characteristic. That's the first thing people see. They're going to judge me. They're going to decide whether or not they want to have a relationship with me based on their understanding or their acceptance of these very visible malformations. So I think that, I mean, for me, I identified with my identifying characteristic as this, because I knew what my identifying characteristic is. I know I'm much deeper than all of that, but it's the first, you know, I feel like I have to say, hi, my name is Jonah, and I've, you know, it's like, and I'm an alcoholic, for example. It's not hi, you know what I'm saying? So it's this name one thing about yourself. And these people have such low self-esteem. That's the first thing they think of. It's that I have a limp or I have nosebleeds. So I don't know. I mean, it's very hard to discuss this without turning it into a therapy session. So
that's like most of these sessions. I was like tearing up when we did It Follows. I had to send everyone. They sent me a bill. That's what happened. Yeah. What do you think about everything we've said, Ben?
Well, there are definitely some things that I agree with and some things that I don't agree with. When I was watching this, I think kind of struggled and like really fought to try and figure it out. That's just sort of my natural reaction, right? I kind of wanted to turn everything into sort of a meaningful symbol, and well, this perfectly maps onto society in this way and that way and so on and so forth. And to help me do that, I looked up some interviews with the cast, looked up interviews with the director, and his explanation of this, what's his name? Hold on. Yorgos, right? So when he's explaining this, it sounded to me almost like his entire goal here was to take something really, really mundane and everyday and something that we normally wouldn't pay attention to and just abstract the shit out of it to make it a certain way. So my interpretation of this movie is ultimately going to be sort of like experiential, right? I almost take it like a piece that you could maybe hang up in a gallery. It's meant to be sort of like weird, sort of artistic, or at least in my perspective. So when you talk about things like, you know, maybe the animalistic component of this, I don't necessarily think it's meant to be some giant statement. I think it's supposed to really be talking about something kind of like every day. And when Jonah was talking about, you know, feeling less than human, I really think that hit the nail on the head there with that particular piece. I know like there was some commentary here about that not really fitting into the film and that being sort of a miss. But I kind of get that, right? So the entire thing here, even when you're looking at sort of the version of society where they have a heavy emphasis on coupling, and then the other society where there's a heavy emphasis on singlehood or independence, you know, you have these rules imposed on you. And if you sort of fail to live up to that, then that sort of out-group kind of rejection sort of kicks in, like in both places like Jonah was talking about. And I really think the animalistic part was supposed to speak to that. And, you know, going back to that old sort of adage, manners maketh man, you know, if you can't sort of figure out kind of like the societal structure and play the game well enough to succeed in this one particular way, then clearly you're less than human. I thought it was kind of an interesting statement. You know, and even that might be reading too much into it, because I really think this was just, like I said, super experiential and not meant to be like heavily meaningful in terms of the symbols, just more like taking something very mundane and sort of abstracting it. But yeah, I just definitely wanted to go back to that one point at least and sort of throw that out there.
I wanted to sort of address the idea that even the couples were emotionless in this thing. I think that was, you know, when Garrett was talking about the idea that these are these socially awkward people, I'm not given to believe that this universe is composed of anything except for socially awkward people. And that was shown in the hotel manager, I forget her name, the hotel manager's character, and the other characters. Like the hotel manager is up there with her husband singing at one point, and they're even her entire bearing and his entire bearing is sort of this marriage of convenience kind of thing, which is what the entire film is building up to. To your point, Ben, about the animalistic thing, I can sort of see where you're coming from, and I like how you were able to sort of construct an apologia for the film in that way. It's certainly something I hadn't thought about. So I think the director should send you a check or something.
Well, I just want to also add that I think it was you, Jim, who said that or maybe it was Garrett, that these characters their relationships are flat and that they don't really have anything interesting about them. There's no depth to them. But I think that's another point the movie's trying to make, is that it doesn't matter if you have a deep, meaningful relationship. All that matters is that you have a relationship. And again, that's kind of like, I have a really fucked up myopic view, because I've never had one. I have a really fucked up myopic view of relationships and what they should be and how they function. Because it's like, that meme that says, it's like it's like a 2-part meme, and there's a million of them, so you can just Google image it. And like somebody gets they do a face plant while skateboarding, and then like the second image says, doesn't matter, had sex. And so it's like there's this whole, or like, there doesn't matter. As long as you have a relationship, as long as you got laid at the end of the night, yeah, bro. It's a very dude bro kind of, that all that matters, I'm repeating myself, is that you have the relationship. It doesn't, and I think that's what the emphasis society says, that basically your acceptance of society is based on a punch card and how many times it's enough.
Yeah, and it's not really even your acceptance, it's your value. Right, your value in society is placed in lieu of your relationships, and I think that's the piece where we start to talk about the horror of the film. Is that the evaluation of being a person and not being a person comes down to your ability or inability to be in a relationship.
And that's why so to answer Garrett's question, it's sort of a two-sided. On one hand, it feels like it's validating to hear that somebody else is saying it, but on the other hand, I'm like, oh shit, that's actually how society is. That's how I think that people view me. And I have a very hard time accepting that they don't, because I haven't had the relationship despite all those things. It's like, so.
But you do realize, Jonah, there's a way out of this. You find a blind lady and you just go into a bathroom and you take a knife and you just go, okay. And you just decide, we'll have something in common here in a minute.
The ending is a big part I wanted to discuss.
Let's hold off on the ending, can we? Because I think the ending makes more sense to talk about the ending toward the end.
Yeah.
Move towards that. But yeah, no, Jonah, I was agreeing with you when I was talking about, and I think that there's the deliberate reason for pairing them up based on such superficial things. That was clearly a choice, and I think it actually was a merit to the film that it was highlighting people who can't connect with other people on any other basis. It's putting forward an aspect of the human condition, not one that most people here experience on a frequent basis, but obviously you do, Jonah. And so by making that the centerpiece of the film, I think it's drawing attention to something about human beings that other films haven't drawn attention to. And that, I think, is to the film's credit.
So I want to make a comment and I want to ask a question to everybody. And the comment goes back really quickly, 30 seconds, to something Jim said about like the people in the forest and being the single people, and they have their own weird reverse rules. And I think my interpretation of that was that even rebellions have a sense in which they become systematized over time, right? So like, I mean, when you think of the entire time at the hotel, everything, it's like a ritualized system of interactions in which love is like deflated and diffused and systematized. And so when you think about rebellions in life, I mean, we can think of political rebellions or anything like that, artistic rebellions, there's a sense in which those get lost after the rebellion's over, right? After they've won to a certain extent. And that doesn't exactly happen in this film, but rebellions have the capacity to become systematized themselves. So that didn't seem too far off to me. That was the closest thing to, I'm hoping that makes sense, because the director was probably high on shrooms when he made this. My question is about tranquilizing the escapees. Like, so there's this thing in the film where if you tranquilize like escapees and shoot them, you get to extend your stay. What's that saying? What's the point of that?
Well, I mean, if I'm taking my sort of fascism interpretation of this, then that would simply be the powerful conscripting an army to hunt down the powerless, and to further this societal oppression of single people. Not only are single people ostracized to this hotel, they also have to hunt down other single people. I think that's part of what the film is. I mean, if I'm taking my sort of
yeah, it's a power approach. Yeah, so if you see this purely as an issue of power, then that makes sense. It's a mechanism within that system of power. I see that. I'm wondering how that would be relationally if we take maybe like Jonah's perspective, like what that is supposed to mean.
The whole idea is that you're not allowed to be single. That's the whole point of the movie. So the fact that
maybe it is a power thing through and through.
Right. So the fact that there are single people just means that, like, so the alternative, right? There's no third option. Either you live in the woods or you live in the hotel, or actually there's a third option. You live in the world, but that's only temporary. It's until one of you dies, or until the relationship ends, and then you're back either in the woods or the hotel. So being in the relationship is a temporary fix. So basically, like I said, there's only two options that you have. And if you don't want to be in the hotel either because you think it's a fascist regime, or you just manage to escape, you're still not wanted in this world. And if you're lucky enough as to find love in the wild, you can't have it. So it's a fucked if you do, fucked if you don't kind of situation. So I just basically it's very simple. You're not allowed to be single, and so you're rewarded, basically temporarily rewarded for me. I don't know. I'm repeating myself. You guys get what I'm saying.
So if it's time to shift, can we talk about the narration?
Yes, I was just about to do that. Antonio's not with us tonight, but that was one of the things he wanted us to get into, is the function of narration and whether we liked it or not.
Yeah, I hated it. I thought it was redundant. There was really nothing at all that you learned from the narration that you couldn't learn just by watching the film. You cut the narration out, and you wouldn't be lost or confused. You'd know every single point. Sometimes it's literally redundant. They literally narrate the thing that you just watched, which, again, I can tell is deliberate. That was sort of the point. But if it was what it was trying to do was annoy me, then mission accomplished. If it was trying to do anything else, then I don't think it succeeded.
I am convinced that the entire point of the narration was to have the director hear Rachel Weisz say, "He fucked me in the ass." That was the whole function of the narration, was to just get her to say that for some reason. I don't know.
Hold on, I've got a fan theory here. And I know we're not supposed to talk about the ending yet, guys. I know. But I really think the narration is what happens after the scene in the restaurant and the blind lady's character gets recaptured and she's telling the hospital people what happened.
No, it's very clear. It's the diary. That's her diary that she's writing into. They find it later. It's quite explicit in the film.
Oh, okay, well, never mind.
Is it? Well, I don't remember that. That's part of the.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, there's a scene in which they find her diary. She lost it in the woods. That's how the people in the woods find out that they're planning on running off together. All the narration is Rachel Weisz's character, what she was writing in her diary.
Yeah, I think
the movie even more. I didn't know that. I missed that part.
I did too. I totally missed that. Thank you, Garrett.
What I wrote is this. It's only two or three sentences. Narration is all in the past tense and told not from his perspective, but her perspective. The movie could have been why wouldn't David tell his own story? But that answers that. So that ties into, I'll leave this sentence out because it ties into the end. So I think it points to the fact that she's reflecting on her experiences, which goes back to the fact that it's her diary. I had a sentence I omitted, which goes into my interpretation of the ending. So
it's her diary. Wow, I did not know that.
I think now's the time to bring in Robert McKee, who was famously in Story, one of the best books on screenwriting ever, talks about how narration is a bad screenwriter's crutch. So whether it's a diary or not a diary, or whatever the fuck it is, if she's telling it to the doctors later, whatever, is, and it is a diary. I do remember that scene as well. But that, like, you can exclude that and tell everything visually. We were talking about this when we were talking about silent film,
Phantom
Carriage, a few weeks ago, and how film is a visual medium, and if you can tell something through pictures or through the camera work, then you should, and you cut out all of the narration. There was a film that I went to not too long ago, the Brad Status, which I got up to go to the bathroom, and I was like, oh, what if I miss something? Don't worry, there will be a voiceover explaining the scene when you get back. And literally there fucking was. And and so that's one of the things that I sort of agree with Garrett about the narration. So go ahead.
I'm gonna say that I agree with you that narration is lazy, but let me just say one thing. If you're blind, you need someone explaining shit to you. So maybe that's kind of a throwback to the whole that no vision. If you can't see what's going on in the movie, she's doing the job for the visually impaired.
That's creative, but most of the diary, if not all the diary, is written before she goes blind. So in terms of the time sequence doesn't make sense. But yeah, I get thematically it might work. But something else which again frustrated me, and again, because part of the reason why I caught that it was a diary and that stood out to me is because they're so careful to set up this code and all these signals so that they don't actually talk. And then she's dumb enough to write it all down in the fucking diary. It's like, wait a minute. The whole point is this totalitarian regime is spying on you. You have a way of communicating with the person. Why are you writing this down? And if you're going to write it down, why not use a code? And it's just,
It was lazy. It was definitely lazy.
Well, in general, I have a really hard time with first-person narrative in novels. And I know that's really lazy, and it makes me look like illiterate and like I don't like books. But when I'm reading a novel and it's in the first person, I keep saying to myself, who is this person talking to? Why are they telling me? How are they recording? Like, how are they remembering something that all of this verbatim? I mean, and I'm just too literal with it. And so I find that narration in film, generally, it can work, but it doesn't always work.
Don't read Twilight. Just gonna, not that I have, but I'm just saying if that's if you don't like that.
I have.
I had no plan on it. So.
Yeah, the sort of rule about narration is, can you tell the story without the narration? And if you can, if the visuals are so good, I think Goodfellas is a prime example. Hannah and Her Sisters is another example. You're not going to want to cut that stuff out, and you're still going to have all of the plot events of the film be told visually. So that's sort of a bottom line rule about narration, and it certainly didn't work with this film because it was, as Garrett says, sort of summarizing the shit that you just saw. In terms of your point, Jonah, about narration in novels, I think that when you first mentioned that, I originally thought of The Great Gatsby and how in some cases the narrator becomes a character in his perspective, and also Holden Caulfield. Oh God,
Catcher in the Rye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm a fucking literature professor, and I forgot.
I wasn't gonna go there. So I thought
what is wrong with me right now? Another cigarette. Yeah. So I think that those like narration can be used well. It just wasn't in this, especially because it was an entire story told by a supporting character who wasn't there for most of the events that are being depicted on film. And so I think it can work sometimes. It just didn't here. So.
The rule of thumb should be that no one gets to do narration unless it's Morgan Freeman. Morgan Freeman does the narration. Otherwise, cut it.
Do you want to hear Morgan Freeman say, and then he fucked me in the ass?
Well, I just want to. We're gonna make it. After this, I have to talk to you about something, Ben. Speak on the topic of narration.
Well, really quickly, can I piggyback on this? I don't want to get too far into it, but I feel like this is something I notice more in not just horror films, but in films in general. Is narration is added? It's almost a dumbing down of films. I noticed that happens a lot, especially in. So one of the things I'm doing is I'm trying to find really good 2017 horror films. Like I like throwing new things, fresh things on the podcast. So last night I watched a couple new horror films, and Garrett asked me how they were, and one of them I just had to eviscerate because it was nothing but narration. It was just narration. It was like, here's what's happening. It's like, I'm not dumb. Like, let me earn some of this. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's progressively more of a thing. Am I off in that? I mean, I feel like maybe it might just be a horror films these days, but I feel like overall when I go see a movie, there's more narration in it, and there's more. They're doing the work for me, and I kind of feel like I feel stupid. A little more stupid if for the most part when that happens to me. I don't know. It's a trend, I guess, is what I'm saying. I don't know.
No,
I don't know.
I agree with you, Noah. I mean, I've noticed it about the same amount, but it's worse.
Okay.
So in terms of the number of films that I've seen, that I've heard narration in, it's about the same. I mean, we're sort of chatting on the side here about how they fucked up Blade Runner with narration, the original theatrical cut. And that was, 1982, I believe. So but the narration is written worse. It's written, the best comedy of the summer, Girls Trip, has some completely unnecessary narration. And it's written horribly. In terms of horror films in general, I think that they are, there's been a gradual dumbing down of the horror genre over the past few years, as I was telling Annabelle Creation just the other day, and this type of holding your hand, lack of trust of the audience is also, I think, a reaction to the marketplace. You've got. They're trying to make lowest common denominator kind of films, and it's not surprising that they use narration to reach that lowest common denominator.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I one of the things we talk about probably ad nauseum in this podcast, or at least I do, is just how unbelievably shitty this genre is overall. I mean, my goal one day would be to have horror films win Academy Awards. Like that would treat them as though they're worthy, worthy of analysis, worthy of something cultural, or you know what I mean? I feel like they're just, you're right. They're low hanging fruit in the industry. And I don't know, some of them I think are worth more than that. Anyway, but that gets us into like a whole nother.
Are you guys familiar with Sturgeon's Law?
No, what is Sturgeon's Law?
Sturgeon's Law, named after the science fiction writer Theodore Sturgeon. It says that 95% of science fiction is crap, but then again, 95% of everything is crap.
That's true.
But stop me, Noah, if I go on a rant about, or stop me, anybody, if I go on a rant about the marketplace as it applies to horror films. But there seem to be a group of people who, if you make a $5, $10, $15 million film, they're a group of people who will go see any fucking horror film. They'll go see anything, and they will make that film profitable. And what we're seeing in the marketplace is this on the one hand, we have really cheap $5 million, $10 million, $15 million films that make a $15 million or a $30 million gross. And then we have $200 million films that make $500 million worldwide. And so we're missing that middle market as studios have sort of moved away. So it's really dependent upon us and our listeners and our subscribers to vote with our wallets, go see the really good horror films when they come out and be 1 or 2 theaters for the 1 week that they come out, and make sure that the really good shit gets popular and the really good shit gets makes a lot of money, so that we can move horror into a more artistic genre.
So just for the record, The Lobster had a €4 million budget and had a gross of $8.7 million. So wherever that puts it on your scale, Jim.
Over here.
Yeah, but I love that. I think that's a great, I mean, that's a great idea. I think that's something that is so necessary. I mean, I drove 50 miles to go see Raw at like a specialty theater in Dallas because they didn't have it anywhere I was playing. And I wouldn't be caught fucking dead seeing Annabelle or like The Conjuring 43. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things where I want to value horror films. Anyway, yeah. So anyway, I thought we'd kind of segue way out of the way of The Lobster. Do you guys have anything else you guys want to, any new topics with The Lobster that you want to bring up?
Do we want to talk about the end a bit?
I want to get to the end. Before we get to the end, can maybe someone else can help make sense of this one? Because one of the things I didn't understand about the narrative is after they flee the hotel and they go into the forest, they keep going on these missions into the city. But what are they trying to accomplish in the city? I don't get it. What's the point of them going into the city?
It's a movie, Garrett. Stop reading into it.
I'm not reading
it was for like food and water and shit. I thought it was for basic life supplies.
I mean, that would make sense, but they never show them actually picking up or bringing or carrying or bringing any of them back, do they?
Well, okay, so the function, I think, of this, the function of the city in terms of the film was to at least show that I think Rachel Weisz and Colin Farrell were actually falling for each other. Like it sort of underscored that a little more. Those sequences where they're kissing and stuff on the couch, right?
Right, but they were at someone else's house. You know, the other members of like the clan in the forest, the Singletons in the forest, were there. It's like they were undercover or something like that. Like they had some sort of goal that they were trying to accomplish, but that was never made clear to me.
I think that in part it's to show that the world does not consist of just a hotel that next to a forest.
Right. I understand from the filmmaker's point of view why you want to show that. I want to ask, narratively speaking, why were they going there? What was their motivation to go there?
Narratively speaking, I really think the forest was meant to be a metaphor, and the trips to the leader of the loners, whatever, her parents' house, was to keep up appearances and to sort of maintain the image that she's still a functioning part of society as a whole. So yeah, I mean, she's going to take friends, she's going to take her significant other, she's going to kind of like do her little song and dance, but then when it's all said and done, kind of go back into the seclusion of what she finds normal, which is not what society at large accepts.
But again, that just begs the question, gives rise to the question, why does she want to keep up appearances? Why doesn't she just live in the forest 24/7? None of this is explained.
I don't know, man. Maybe she has a trust fund or something. I mean, it could be anything.
Before we go, there is a couple scenes. One of them is the final shot of the movie. But did any scenes stand out to you guys as particularly difficult or hard to watch? For me, the two, I think, were the two others were the suicide scene when she's screaming in agony on the ground and the hand in the toaster. Those two were felt like I had my stomach being ripped apart.
Yeah, definitely the suicide sequence was drawn out and left me feeling really uneasy.
I had difficulty. I mean, it was a quick shot, but the shot of the dog that had been kicked to death, that upset me.
Oh, yeah.
That too. Well, yeah. And I guess I feel good that I felt something, because it was beginning to feel too much apathy. And I think the movie, I guess there are the movies to show that if you feel something, there's some humanity left in you. I think that the fact that the movie's horrifying is actually a good thing, rather than, I mean, the fact that if it affected you in any way, I mean, you can hate something, but if you hate it, at least you feel something, rather than just saying this movie sucked,
Yeah, but that's kind of cheap. It's very easy, I think, to elicit a reaction from most people. I mean,
dude, I cried in Bambi. I mean, I still cry in Bambi. Fuck.
But Bambi, I think you can give a certain amount of artistic credit to. It takes very little art or skill to elicit a disgust reaction or a jump scare, for example, right? I mean, those are very cheap and very easy. So while it is true that evoking a reaction is a minimal measure for art or for film, it's a pretty low bar to say that it got a reaction from you. I mean, most human beings are wired to react to things, and even horribly incompetent narrative and acting can elicit a reaction in that generic sense.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think that's really a part of the whole thing, is that, you know, pretty much everyone is wired to react to those kind of things. And I think they were using that specifically to set up the character of that sort of like psychopath woman who, the one that watches the suicide and that our main character is trying to impress, who also happened to kick his dog to death. I really think it's meant to sort of show her place in kind of the overall story there, where they're potentially saying that, yes, this woman has no heart, she has no empathy, and yet because she is able to kind of like prop up sort of like the societal order, which is sort of goes back to the tranquilizer thing, like she kept getting all this extra time because she was so vicious and cruel and heartless. So as a psychopath, she's able to kind of like follow along and support the rules to blend in, and she is sort of valued more than a person who can react to those kind of situations but yet can't follow the rules, right? I don't know. Another sort of like broad, drawn out explanation of something that probably isn't actually a part of the movie, but maybe another way to think about it.
Yeah, like I feel like for half of these, if we were to ask the director his opinion, he'd be like, I don't know.
I did think it was interesting that, again, he obviously is going to try to hook up with somebody. I mean, that the imperative to do that's pretty clear. And of all the people he chooses, the sociopathic woman. I mean, I didn't think this isn't a criticism. I do find it interesting that he didn't try to lie his way into a relationship with any of the other women. He chose to go for the sociopath, which is sort of an interesting move. But I want to go back to my other point again about things that didn't make sense. The scene when they break into the hotel and they hold the hotel manager and her husband at gunpoint, I expected, narratively speaking, for that to be a shift. I expected, okay, after this is like a rebellion. This is an uprising, that something's going to change, something's going to be different. But they play these mind games with him, and he pulls the trigger, and the gun's empty, and then that's it. They just walk away, and then it's like everything's the same. Wait, what was the point of that? Isn't narratively going to connect to something?
I think that's like a little bit of Fight Clubby stuff. Like you take it away, and then they know what they have. Like they're basically throw a bomb into what their relationship, because the discussion they're going to have after they walk out of the room is going to be far more, the kink in their relationship is going to be far more traumatic than just if they were murdered, because now that their relationship might end, and then now they're going to be forced to go through their 45 days of
right, I get that. You don't see any of that, right? They don't give you any of that in the film. Again, if they had showed like at least just one shot of the hotel manager or the hotel manager's husband in the hotel as a guest, that would have established that point. That would have shown, okay, now we see what happened to these characters. But we didn't get any of that.
Let me posit. I mean, you know how much I agree with you, because we talked about narrative structure vis-a-vis movies all the time and in the past, Garrett. So I'm more than sympathetic to your point. But one thing that Jonas said a little bit earlier, and I think it was almost a quick flippant comment, like, it's a movie, Garrett, don't. But I'm wondering, let's sort of sit with this idea for a second, that this film is not asking to be judged based upon narrative or plot coherence. Let's sit with the idea of, if this film is far more postmodern than our narrative logical sensibilities, so that it's asking to be looked at as a connection of scenes and as a connection of ideas rather than a plot through line. Maybe this is like poor man's David Lynch version of a romantic comedy. Now, can we appreciate the film more if we look at it from that point of view? I've tried, and I don't know that I can, but I'm wondering if that's an intellectual or a thought experiment that we might all want to entertain for a little bit and see if that gets us anywhere.
I think that point is totally fair. Honestly, I really do see it as being more like that, as opposed to something that was meant to be very chronologically sort of coherent and like fill in all the details in terms of a strong plot. But I'm sort of surprised by Garrett putting this particular scene out there, because this might have actually been one of my favorite scenes in the movie, particularly because it was very probably poorly done version of what they did in The Dark Knight, where Joker put, you know, two different groups of people out on the boats, and they gave them kind of like, you know, kill switches or whatever to blow the other one up. I mean, in this one scene, you see that this husband sort of ends up like rejecting kind of like that relationship and falling back on very, very selfish kind of desires and drives there. And he's willing to kill this other person to save himself. And and the fact that the kind of the subject of that actually failed in this movie, I think was fairly interesting.
Yeah,
you know, they didn't set it up nearly as well or whatever, but you know, it kind of seemed like that to me.
Yeah, now the scene as a standalone scene I thought was great. You know, again, it was really interesting. My problem wasn't the scene itself, it's that it didn't connect to anything. Is that they didn't,
yeah, you didn't get the payoff. You didn't get to see anything after. There was no, yeah.
Which is where like a post-structural reading might come in. And like, all right, if we try to evaluate this film based upon plot and structure, and because it's not even a 3-act film, I think it's a either 6 or 2-act film. It falls apart under any kind of structural analysis. And I can't imagine that this director, Academy Award nominated director, mind you, I can't imagine that all of that flew by this director without him realizing that he's not making a classically structured film. So I guess when we evaluate, you know, and it's hard to evaluate postmodern works of art because postmodern and post-structural works of art, because we end up having to resort to personal interpretations. We end up having to resort to the types of interpretations that Jonah proffered at the beginning of this podcast, where I had these reactions to these ideas in the film, and that's why it resonated for me. Not, this is a great film because look at how supremely plotted it is, look at how great the acting is, and all of the other criteria that we normally apply to film, that we applied to A Dark Song last week, well, that you guys applied to A Dark Song last week, and that we applied to Phantom Carriage and all the other ones. Like, all of those are traditionally structured 3-act films, so we had a lot less sort of like, oh wow, I feel like a lobster sometimes. And I think, so I guess Ben's reaction, like, I really like the scene, and Garrett's reaction is, I like the scene, but what the fuck later? Those are appropriate, with the exception of what about later. At least that's sort of how I can try to give this film more credit than initially I want to. Does that make sense to everybody?
See, I think that would make sense if it wasn't for the scene. Again, the scene itself, there's nothing postmodern at all about it. It is a very straightforward narrative. You understand precisely what's happening. You understand, at least in general, what the motivations of the respective characters are. If it wasn't, I mean, if David Lynch were directing this film, that scene might start off like that, but by the end of it, things would get just completely fucking weird.
Right. At the end, rabbits would be talking. I mean, yeah, I take your point. You're absolutely, like, I agree with you. I'm trying to sort of do an apologia for the film the same way Ben did a little bit ago.
If I can interject something, I'm reading through the notes that I didn't get to say, because, you know, I realized once I wrote these thoughts down, and once, oh shit, I actually have to read this. This is a lot of words. So one of the things I said that I should have is that scares me about the movie, and I could have said this anywhere in this podcast, is that it's what the movie articulates is a lack of control. People have no control over their destinies. They're not in control of, basically, the world they live in is dictated to them, and they just have like reluctant acceptance to it. And it's that loss of control that scares me. And in all the movies that I have on the podcast list, it's about a loss of control. It's about people put in a situation like Compliance, which we already did, about people who are just basically held hostage in this world, and they just have to accept their fate, and they can't do anything about it. And that loss of control is really at the heart of what I identify with, the heart of the environment I grew up in, where I'm not allowed to have relationships, or where my inability to connect with people that I'm trying to overcome. All of that is.
Well, that's also in Compliance. That's also in The Hunt. And to be fair,
Right.
Jonah, that's in a lot of the films that scare myself and Antonio. Like, think of Sunshine. And no matter what they do, it's like, you know, the shit's going down no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try. I mean, I think that's a very deep and very fundamental fear in a lot of good horror films, is not being in control, you know. But a lot of yours is like social stuff, social control, right? That's the flavor of control that I think I'm noticing in a lot of your films, is it's social stuff. It's either absolute fucking idiots are in control of things and have power, or, you know, your value is based on things that ultimately seem outside of your control, which I think is really interesting. And that's, again, is what to me classifies this definitely, at least in some sense, as a horror film. Has that same sort of fundamental fear, I think, in some of the other ones that we've looked at. That's actually really interesting to me.
Yep.
Okay. Do you guys want to? Let's dive into the end. I want to talk about this. Anyone, just go for it.
So the question is, does he abandon her, or does he do it? Does he go through with it? And my feeling is that he abandons her. Either, well, the choice, or and that kind of last scene of left me sick to my stomach, to the point I feel that last shot was filmed so well with the lighting. I mean, just technically that was beautifully done. The lighting, I felt like the anxiety, like I could, it was palpable tension. So I feel like he just went out the exit. He couldn't go through with it. And the reason why, and there's kind of merit to that, because let me rephrase, I'm sorry. One theory I've heard is that he does go through with it, because the cut to black when it cuts to black and when the final credits roll up, it's like 5 seconds. It's a long time. It's a long screen time to have just nothing, and that would indicate that that's visualizing what nothingness looks like, so that he's going to blind and he'll hobble back to her. But at the same time, I think that it would be a much more tragic end, and a much more going to what I think Ben said about how it's her diary, and they found her and she's back in the woods. So I feel like it would be a much sicker, crueler, realistic end if he just selfishly decides he can't go through with it, and then he leaves her.
It can't be her diary after she's back in the woods. Again, they find the diary earlier on before they blind her. That's why they blind her, because they find the diary. And of course, if she's blind, she's not going to be writing a diary. That's
okay.
But
you can scribble. I'll scribble. I scribble in my diary. Wait, go ahead. Sorry.
To proffer an alternate, I think he does gouge his eyes out. There's that long sequence where he's appreciating his eyesight, and then takes a spoon and goes off and does the deed, I think. And I think the final cut is that, and you know, does that ending work? Is sort of, I think it's for me, it's sort of, I've heard the theory that it's ambiguous, that he might not go through with it, but I don't know. I definitely, I guess maybe we could do like a little poll. Like, does he cut out his eyes? I think yes. Anybody else?
Well, either way, it's a horrible ending.
Regardless, no matter how you cut it, it's horrifying. I definitely would agree that he cut out his eyes, or they blinded himself.
I don't think he did.
I don't think he did either.
I mean, originally, I was going to say that because of my theory about the narration, whatever. Taken separately. Okay, let's just look at this as it fits into the rest of the movie. Going back to that scene that we were just talking about, how we sort of highlighted how fragile these relationships really are. And yeah, I mean, they seem to be by necessity based on similarity and stuff. And so that's why he's going to do this in the first place, is so that you have some kind of basis for connection there and you can understand each other. But most of the time, that's just sort of by circumstance in the movie. You know, you have this person who fakes a nosebleed so he can marry a person who naturally gets nosebleeds all the time. But in that same sort of like sequence of events when we were talking about sort of like the gun scene, we also have our main character running in there and letting the cat out of the bag that he doesn't actually get nosebleeds, and therefore, like, you know, sort of crumbling the foundation of that relationship, because that's that sort of connection there is lost. But like, I mean, if we just take all of that together and sort of interpret the very ending, I think he's put into a situation where, you know, the rubber really meets the road, and he has to make this big self-sacrifice to make the relationship work. But everything else in the film would suggest that that's not in human nature to do that. So I don't think he did it.
I think he abandons her, yeah.
Yeah, now to me, the fundamental flaw of that is it's Colin Farrell's performance. It's what you actually see. There's no hesitation in him. There's no conflict. There's no should I I don't know if I can do it. He's clearly
driven.
Yeah, he's doing it. When you look at the performance, I find there's no ambiguity at all. If they wanted ambiguity, they could have given it.
Have you ever been? God, I have to be careful how I say this. Have you ever been near suicidal, where like you're holding a razor to your wrist and you just can't go through with it? Well, maybe
I haven't gotten so far as to put a razor to my wrist, no, but I have had suicidal thoughts and contemplated it and wondered, you know, in a concrete way, what are my options? What are the tools I could use?
Right. So I mean, I'm saying that basically, like, where you're basically literally all you have to do is just pull, whether it's a trigger or your hand, whatever it is. All you got to do is pull, but you can't go through it. So he's basically like he's egaring himself, but he can't do it. I'm saying that he thinks about it. He's
not stealing himself. Again, look at his performance. There is there's no conflict in his body language. You know, conflict would be like, putting it up and pulling it down. Instead, he's just sort of like, okay, do I want to do it here? Do I do it here?
He thinks about it for a while. He isn't just going and then just
choosing which part of the retina he wants to slice. That's all that's happening.
Yeah. And to this, I might add again, why this, I mean, again, narratively speaking, this is stupid because he needs to take out both of his eyes. After he gets the one in, he's going to be overwhelmed with such a profound amount of pain that he's almost certainly not going to be able to have the wherewithal to gouge out the other. And even if he does have the wherewithal, it'll almost be impossible to get the knife in there in a way that it will work. So this is just a dumb way for him to actually try to blind himself. But setting that aside, again, it seems to me abundantly clear that if they wanted there to be ambiguity, they fucked it up because there is no ambiguity present on the screen.
So wait, what's your opinion? Does he do it or not?
He absolutely does.
Oh, he totally does it.
Yeah, he totally does it.
But Garrett, you said does not, right?
No, he does.
He does. He does. Yes. He does.
I think we've got 3 votes for blind Colin Farrell and 2 votes for not so blind Colin Farrell.
I mean, I'll put it this way. If he doesn't do it, he only doesn't do it because he realizes that it's dumb to do it with a knife. And he's going to figure out a better way to do it later.
Noah, ask Antonio right now.
What?
Noah, ask Antonio right now whether he blinds himself or not so he can get a tiebreaker.
No, that would be a
tie. Like, this is 3-2.
Yeah, 3-2. There ain't no tie, man. It's going to be 4-2. I guarantee you. I think Antonio is going to side with us, man. But Garrett's totally right. Like, think about his persona, who he is throughout the film. He's damn sure of what he does. And when he does it, he goes all the way through with it. I mean, think how paranoid he was when he found out that other fellow who gave Rachel Weisz a rabbit was short-sighted. Think about how strong he was in trying to go, are you short-sighted? And he looks at his eyes and I mean, that's how he's built as a character, right? So the film, I would argue the film at least wants you to think he did it.
And he's willing to spend his life with a complete sociopath just to get out of it. You know, he's willing to literally live a lie, a terrible lie, just to escape the situation.
So and think about the 2 conflicting. Just one more so that I could pile on. Joking. But think about the 2 conflicting themes that we have for this. Well, not conflicting. The 2 interpretations that we've been bandying about throughout this podcast. The first is relationships are so important, and relationships are built upon commonality. Well, she's blind. He's got to be blind. The other one, fascism. This is a society that is wreaked with total control of the government, or not of government, of a society, a societal control over other people. then in that case, what better way to show that than a character self-blinding? So I think that any way you slice it, the logical extension of the logical ending for this film is that Colin Farrell cuts out his fucking eyes.
Hold on. Just to go back to, okay, yes, he was willing to live a lie so long as it didn't mean a personal sacrifice. As soon as she killed his dog, as soon as she took something away from him, he was out of there. He was gone. Whenever the jealousy thing too, think about jealousy. I mean, any jealous idiot is willing to fight somebody over the person that they love, yes. But, I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be willing to cut off their leg.
But okay, first off, he is making a huge sacrifice. He's going to have to live with a fucking sociopath, and he's going to have to pretend to not have any feelings. It's a pretty massive sacrifice. And he only, he tries to swallow it about the dog. He just can't do it. He breaks down. But you also made another point. Yes, he loves Rachel Weisz. That's pretty clear. I mean, as much as the character is capable of love, right? I mean, he clearly wants to be with her in a genuine way, not just so he has someone to be with, so he can avoid the persecution. He really wants to be with her. Hence, willing to gouge out his eye.
Yeah, and for all these reasons, I think for me, it's pretty unambiguous. But I've heard this is not the first time that I've heard he doesn't gouge out his eyes argument. But I'm sorry, Jonah, I interrupted you earlier. Please.
No, I forget what I was going to say. It's fine.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
We have officially agreed, Jonah, that Colin Farrell is blind now. So it's
right, who's going to email him and tell him?
So we should summarize this film and rate it. And I'm a little worried about this part. Yeah, did you want to add something, Garrett? Go ahead.
Yes, I forgot. I wanted to talk about one of the things I really liked about the film was how the kid, when couples fight, they give them a kid to try to calm things over. It's like this society is so willing to use people to their ends as mere means that they're actually willing to give children. Because tell me that real couples don't do that, right? I mean, they start fighting, so what do? They have a kid in order to stabilize the marriage or the relationship. That is very real, and that's something that, I mean, again, I'm not sure I'd call it horrifying. I think it's actually rather funny, but also kind of horrifying in a certain way, I suppose, that people actually use kids like that. I thought that was a little stroke of genius.
No, this is a good time to tell them your favorite scene.
Oh yeah, actually, Garrett, my favorite scene was when that little kid gets kicked in the shin. It's one of the best scenes in cinema history, I think. Like, legitimately, one of my favorite scenes of all time. I laughed so hard I paused the movie.
I have one for you now that I'll send after. Since we're at the end of the podcast, let me just say, look up there's this scene in this movie called Revenge of the Ninja, where a woman and a kid who's like 5 or 6, maybe 7, have a real fight. Like, I don't mean it was like play fighting. I mean, they're like, she's kicking the shit out of him and he's fighting and he's defending himself. It's so hilarious and so dumb. It's so 80s, but it's really funny. So,
it probably was a lot more real than the fight that existed in this film at the shooting range. I don't know what to make of that. That was the weirdest thing.
That was the line in the trailer that made me say, okay, I want to see this movie, was when he says, it's no mistake that the targets are shaped like single people.
I thought it worked in the trailer. It didn't work in the film, though. Because the film was so out there, that's no longer funny. That's just duh. That's a no-brainer, But if it was a little bit closer to our reality, I think that would have been a biting humor. And because you can't quite tell how far out the film is from the trailer, I think it worked in the trailer, not in the film.
Right.
Do you guys have anything else you want to add before we summarize and rate this film? I'm going to do one of these Hail Marys before we rate this. Do you guys have anything else you want to add?
Well, I can add that you just did the cross wrong. It's actually...
Yeah, it's how far removed I am from any kind of religious faith these days. We're going to go with that as my excuse. I was never Catholic, so I always mess that up. So I guess I'll start. So there are really set sequences that I liked in this film and everything else I hated, right? So there's like certain scenes where I totally dug it and I got certain things. And then most of the film I felt was very pretentious. One of the things, no matter how we look at this film, so I know Jim at some point in this podcast said, okay, let's take a step back and let's look at this maybe from a postmodern perspective. Let's draw out like our inner Derrida and go, let's look at this not from structure, and let's talk about like what, and this is a lot of the language I think that Jonah used, is it made me feel this way. I connected with it this way. This is, and even in that sort of frame, I felt that it like the film purported to be deep to me, like to touch on some fundamental aspect of the human condition, but then it trivialized it like to small social observations and intricacies. And I felt like it had the capacity to go a lot deeper, but because of like this really odd attempt at art, making it super artsy, it just couldn't go there. I don't know, it seemed very self-satisfying, self-serving, very pretentious. Unlike Jonah, I was unable to bridge like my real life experience in the way that I interact with the world to the world of this film. There was no bridge for me. And that really frustrated me. Like the first 30 minutes of the film were very intriguing. They kept my interest, and then it just plummeted. And I felt like everything was just monotone. Everything was repetitive. The music was repetitive. Cinematically, it didn't do it for me after the first 30 minutes, besides the little kid being kicked in the shin, which I still think is the greatest thing I've ever seen. So across the board, like I would give this film, Jonah, don't kill me, I would give this film like a 3 out of 10. Cinematically, I'd give it a 3 out of 10. And I think in terms of the fear factor, I would give it a 3 out of 10. As a happily married, heterosexual, monogamous male, white male, I will give it a 3 out of 10. It didn't do it for me. And at the same time, I do want to defend Jonah a little bit because I can see how this is definitely a horror film given the right sort of definition of horror. And I can see why Jonah, knowing Jonah, how he connected with this film and how it would scare him and how it would scare a certain group of people. So I want to pepper it with that, but yeah, it just didn't do it for me. My lowest score. Cinematically, my lowest score, and in terms of horror, my lowest score. Don't kill me, Jonah, but I just got to give it. I really thought hard about this, so 3 out of 10 across the board. What else did you guys think? I'm going to end with Jonah, but what else did you guys think?
I guess I'll go next. I agree more or less with everything you said, Jonah. I give it a 4 out of 10. There are some things about it that I really liked. I think it was an interesting concept, had several interesting ideas. I think Colin Farrell's performance was very solid, but I feel like there was a lot of missed opportunities. There was some fairly simple changes that could have made that, like removing the narration, like connecting that scene, the hostage scene with the hotel manager and her husband, to something bigger. Had they made those fairly minor changes, it would have improved the film dramatically. I like the idea of telling a movie from the perspective of, again, socially awkward people who can't connect, people who have difficulty with relationships. That's something that film should explore more. But I think it's explored better in other films. Joan, you mentioned Her. I would also say Anomalisa, I think, is another film that did explore the same themes but did much better. Interesting ideas. On the whole, though, mostly a failure for it.
Right. By the way, I just said in the chat about the robotic performances. I said this as a joke, but I think it's actually more deep than I intended. About everybody speaking robotically. You're not a human, so stop acting like it. Anyway, just wanted to throw that in there.
Ben, do you want to go next, or do you want me to?
No, sure, I can go. Yeah, so there were some things that I really did enjoy about this. I think they did highlight some really interesting ideas. As I said, I really did like one particular scene where they set up that sort of social experiment. That was pretty cool. I'm not generally one to be tied to, a very set structure. If something is able to inspire within me, it's some divine spark, anyway, if it's inspirational in some way, I can appreciate it. The fact that it's not maybe classically understood as a horror is totally fine with me. Obviously, my favorite horror movie wasn't apparently a horror movie either. Totally on board with that. Were some problems though, and like the way that they tried to portray certain things was probably a little bit shallow. I mean, I know it tried to be very artistic about it, but there are really good ways to take the mundane and make it something extraordinary. Obviously, I mean, that's the whole thing that Stephen King is about, right? Like, I mean, he takes the everyday and turns it into horror, and there's great ways to do that. But this obviously wasn't supposed to be specifically a horror, so maybe not going in that particular direction. But I mean, you can still add something to the mundane and make it extraordinary. I don't think they really hit the mark in that particular way. So yeah, I mean, my score is probably going to be quite similar. I'm going to have to give this, thinking about it from the lens of a horror film, I would have to give this a 4 as well, just because it wasn't particularly scary to me. And while there were really interesting intellectual and visual kind of components to this movie, that left something to be desired. You know, I mean, the music was, I think, actually kind of interesting. You know, it at least made the attempt to turn this into something unnerving and terrifying. Because I'm kind of like Garrett. Like, I did see this as sort of being kind of like a very disturbing sort of soundtrack as opposed to whimsical. But I did appreciate it a little bit more, I think, just because overlaying that on top of things that generally would maybe seem normal is kind of an interesting idea. But, you know, overall, yeah, I mean, it was kind of interesting. I see what they were trying to do, but I mean, it sort of it left me wanting something just a little bit better.
So overall, I thought this was a film that was probably about an hour and a half too long, and but I think it's an hour and 48-minute film, or hour and 43, or something like that. I think this would have been a fine short film. I thought it would actually be a very good short film, because there are, like, unlike Noah, the happily married heterosexual male with his showing off his wedding ring right now. I am, you know, single as well, and so there is sort of a bridge for me to connect with this film, maybe in some similar ways that Jonah did. But so the idea of making a film about a dystopian reality in which you are required to be in a relationship is a very interesting and thoughtful and good idea, and I would like to see a movie about that. Unfortunately, The Lobster is not that film. I think there's one or two sequences that really worked for me. One which we haven't mentioned tonight, and that was he gets up from the table and in slow motion walks toward the woman to ask her to dance. And you could sort of see his, like, the amount of courage that it takes for him to ask this woman to dance. I thought that was fantastic. I think making a hero shot of asking a girl out is, yeah, that's how I feel sometimes, that I need to have sort of a Michael Bay camera while I'm like, would you go out with me? That would be great. You know, and I thought that worked very well. But overall, this film was an hour and a half too long. The dystopian thing, it gets stale. There are no new ideas after about 15 minutes in this film. The only new idea is we go to the forest and they're dickheads too. That's not new. So you know, and so in that way, I don't think the film worked for me, even though I did have an ability to sort of connect with it. And I also saw this film. I saw this film when it first came out on DVD, and then I rewatched it sort of on fast forward earlier today. And when I originally saw this film, I realized that there were two films made about loneliness that came out at about the same time, this and Swiss Army Man. And of the two, Swiss Army Man was far more emotionally effective. It was far more interesting, and this got it a lot more than any other. Like, Swiss Army Man did The Lobster better than The Lobster. And so I sort of saw those two films. I saw them back to back, so I was almost comparing them unintentionally. And I saw Swiss Army Man second, and I was like, no, this is it. This is what The Lobster should have been. So overall, this is a you're on a 10 scale. So 3 out of 10 for me. And the three are all about that one short film that I could really edit The Lobster down into. In terms of scares, it didn't scare me. So I'm 1 out of 10, I guess. Because it doesn't scare me, because we are not a society that is veering toward total totalitarian regime as it relates to coupledom. We might be veering toward a totalitarian regime, but that's a completely different conversation. But it's not because I'm single that I will end up in the death camp. So that's why it didn't really scare me. It didn't really hit me there. So overall, I'm at 3 out of 10, and I recommend her, like Jonah said earlier, although, but I definitely recommend Swiss Army Man, which takes some of the similar themes and a really creative premise and does something that I liked a lot more with.
So there you go, Jonah. 3 out of 10, 3 out of 10, 4 out of 10. Do it. I want to hear that 10 out of 10 now.
Oh, you got punked. I hated this movie. I made you watch it. Oh, wait, Ben, what was your number?
Wait, is that true?
No,
Okay.
That would have been amazing. I would have just given up. I would have given up at that point. Done.
I would have picked a far worse. No, but Ben, what was your number?
So I gave that a 4.
Okay. So, I mean, from a technical just a regular filmmaking point of view, like I said in the beginning, I didn't say it was a great movie. I didn't say it was a good movie. I just said it's a horror movie for me. So, I guess from just a regular, just standalone movie without any of the personal shit, I'd give it like a 5. I'll be generous. I enjoyed it a lot. I thought it was very creative. I guess I have a higher tolerance in some aspects, but for a fear level, I'd give it a 7, just because of what it did to me. It was like a Smith song. It was like hearing a Morrissey song for the first time or something like that. It hit me in all the feels, at least the first time I saw it. I saw it at the right time. I was in the right headspace. I actually made sure I was depressed when I went to see it for the first time, so I would walk out with maximum sadness, which helps. If you're in a good mood, don't see this movie. If you want to be if you want to be sad, start sad. So I guess overall, if I'm gonna average the two, I'd say I'd give the movie a 5. But for fear factor, 7. But I have to qualify what I mean by fear. It didn't scare me like a typical horror movie. It's just the emotional, the unease, I guess is a better word, and the sadness and the emotional reaction it got out of me. For a movie that can elicit a negative emotional reaction, a lot have done it, and this is not as much as other movies, not as much as Garrett's favorite movie, Science Asleep, but this was about a 7.
You know what's interesting, Jonah, is my wife gave me shit for watching this movie without her because it was on our list of someone told her it was on a list of rom-coms, like romantic movies to watch. The Lobster, legitimately The Lobster. And I told her after watching it, I was like, I did you a favor because damn, this film is just classified in way too many odd categories. Very weird.
See, I think that would have been really interesting if the movie fucked up your relationship, even for a night. Then the movie would kind of be the
No, I don't want that for you, Noah.
It did its job. Oh, that's so scary. God, that'd be the ultimate horror movie. If it
That's what I'm telling you. Yeah, see, that's the point. That if
the anti-date film. Wow.
Yeah.
I once saw Blue Valentine on a date. No. Yeah.
By the way, while we were talking about Swiss Army Man, from what I heard about it, I mean, maybe the way it's been sold has been disingenuous to the movie, but the way it's been advertised has specifically made me say, I don't need to see this movie. Movie about a farting. It's basically Castaway with a farting corpse, from what I heard, where Wilson farts, basically.
No, There are a fair share of flatulence jokes in that, but the movie is about much more. The movie is about loneliness, and it's about desperation in terms of relationships. So.
I love Michel Gondry. Science of Sleep is my favorite movie right now, and so it seems very Michel Gondry-ish to me. That's why.
So let's close up shop. This was actually really fun. I'm glad we did this one. I was a little nervous about it just because it tends to be a little more of the personal one. It was almost like the first one we did for It Follows with me. It's interesting to I mean, I really like the idea of finding films that do something like this for somebody. I mean, it's really easy to just talk about a film from a relaxed sort of perspective where it doesn't really do anything for you. But there's certain films that I think just like a good novel where it's so powerful to you, you have to throw it down and you're just like, I need to breathe for a minute. And there's certain films I think that do that too. It would be a shame if none of us had a film that elicited those kind of raw emotions from us. I think at least Jim and Garrett, at least for this last year, Silence did something like that for you. Was it Silence? Yeah. So I mean, so I'm glad we did this in the sense that it's good to have these conversations about films, not so much from a far back perspective, but from a perspective of someone who's been influenced or made them put a stone in their shoe, made them think, bothered them, did something other than they just threw their popcorn bag, into the trash and walked away and never thought about the film again. So I really dug this. So next week we are doing 1920. I think it's a German horror film, 1920. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Now, this was actually rated as Rotten Tomatoes on their top 100 horror films of all time. #1 until a few months ago when it got booted out by Get Out, which seems kind of tragic to me. I mean, Get Out is a great horror film. #1 horror film of all time in terms of rating. I don't know. So we're going to do that one next week. Taking a 2-week hiatus. We'll be back on the 12th of November. We'll have some like Halloween stuff coming out, some actual individual videos during that time, but we won't be doing any shows for the next couple weeks. We're coming back to do a couple other films, Cabin in the Woods, and then I think we're jumping between Session 9, which is Garrett's, and then The Thing, which is a very classic horror film. Also, big. Garrett, it was actually, or Jim, it was actually the critic score. It was the critic score, I think, that they rated it the highest on Get Out. But so we are also want to announce that our website is live as of like 2 hours ago. So if you go to deadlyanalysis.com, we have a list of all of the films that we've talked about and analyzed. You can look at them on your tablet, on your phone, on your computer, and just go through and watch any of them. We have a kind of a short bio of all of the different folks in the podcast. And our schedule for the next month. So check it out. Tell us what you think. Check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And thank you for taking the time to watch. Hope you got something out of it. Hope you decided your animal. Hope to see a bunch of dogs out there after this, since that's what everyone goes for. So thanks for watching, and tune in next week, and we'll see you then.